Mehmed II or Mehmed the Conqueror, the 30th of March 1432, the 3rd of May 1481, Ottoman Turkish, Mehmed-i ثانى, Turkish, 2. Mehmet Turkish pronunciation, mmt, also known as el-Fātiḥ, the Conqueror in Ottoman Turkish, in modern Turkish, Fatih Sultan Mehmet, also called Mahomet II in early modern Europe, was Sultan of the Ottoman Empire twice, first for a short time from 1444 to September 1446, and later from February 1451 to 1481. At the age of 21, he conquered Constantinople and brought an end to the Byzantine Empire, transforming the Ottoman state into an empire. Mehmed continued his conquests in Asia, with the Anatolian reunification, and in Europe, as far as Bosnia and Croatia. Mehmed II is regarded as a national hero in Turkey, and among other things, Istanbul's Fatih Sultan Mehmet Bridge, and Fatih University and Fatih College are all that named after him. Mehmed II was born on the 30th of March 1432, in Edirne, then the capital city of the Ottoman state. His father was Sultan Murad II, 1404-51, and his mother Valide Sultan Huma Hatun, born in the town of Devrekani, Kastamonu. When Mehmed II was 11 years old he was sent to Amasya to govern and thus gain experience, as per the custom of Ottoman rulers before his time. After Murad II made peace with the Karaman Emirate in Anatolia in August 1444, he abdicated the throne to his 12-year-old son Mehmed II. Sultan Murad II had sent him a number of teachers for him to study under. This Islamic education had a great impact in molding the mindset of Mehmed and reinforcing his Muslim beliefs. He began to praise and promote the application of Sharia law. He was influenced in his practice of Islamic epistemology by contemporaneous practitioners of science, particularly by his mentor, Mullah Ghorani, and he followed their approach. The influence of Aksemzeddin in Mehmed's life became predominant from a young age, especially in the imperative of fulfilling his Islamic duty to overthrow the Byzantine Empire by conquering Constantinople. In his first reign, he defeated the crusade led by Janos Hunyadi after the Hungarian incursions into his country broke the conditions of the truce peace of Szeged. Cardinal Julian Cesarini, the representative of the Pope, had convinced the King of Hungary that breaking the truce with Muslims was not a betrayal. At this time Mehmed II asked his father Murad II to reclaim the throne, but Murad II refused. Angry at his father, who had long since retired to a contemplative life in southwestern Anatolia, Mehmed II wrote, "If you are the Sultan, come and lead your armies. If I am the Sultan I hereby order you to come and lead my armies." It was only after receiving this letter that Murad II led the Ottoman army and won the Battle of Varna in 1444. Murad II's return to the throne was forced by Sandal Halil Pasha, the Grand Vizier at the time, who was not fond of Mehmed II's rule, because Mehmed II's influential Lala, royal teacher, Aksemzeddin, had a rivalry with Sandal. Sandal was later executed by Mehmed II during the siege of Constantinople on the grounds that he had been bribed by or had somehow helped the defenders. When Mehmed II ascended the throne in 1451 he devoted himself to strengthening the Ottoman navy, and in the same year made preparations for the taking of Constantinople. In the narrow Bosporus Straits, the fortress Anadolu-Hisar had been built by his great-grandfather Bayezid-i on the Asian side. Mehmed erected an even stronger fortress called Ramli-Hisar on the European side, and thus having complete control of the strait. Having completed his fortresses, Mehmet proceeded to levy a toll on ships passing within reach of their cannon. A Venetian vessel refusing signals to stop was sunk with a single shot and all the surviving sailors beheaded. The conquest of Constantinople was one of the major goals of Islam in Islamic tradition. Reference is made to the prospective conquest of Constantinople in an authentic hadith, attributed to a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, "Verily you shall conquer Constantinople. What a wonderful leader will he be, and what a wonderful army will that army be." Earlier there had been two sieges during the 7th and 8th centuries by the Muslims on account of the hadith. One of the Muslim martyrs was Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, the companion and standard-bearer of the Prophet Muhammad. During the siege his tomb was located by Mehmed's Sheikh Aksemzeddin. After the conquest, Mehmed built Eyüp Sultan Mosque at the site, by which he wanted to emphasize the importance of the conquest to the Islamic world and highlight his role as Ghazi. In 1453 Mehmed commenced the siege of Constantinople with an army between 80,000 to 200,000 troops and a navy of 320 vessels, though the bulk of them were transports and store airships. The city was now surrounded by sea and land. The fleet at the entrance of the Bosphorus was stretched from shore to shore in the form of a crescent, to intercept or repel any assistance from the sea for the besieged. In early April, the siege of Constantinople began. After several failed assaults, the city's walls held off the Turks with great difficulty, even with the use of the new Warban's bombard, a cannon similar to the Dardanelles gun. The harbor of the Golden Horn was blocked by a boom chain and defended by 28 warships. On 22 April, Mehmed transported his lighter warships overland, around the Genoese colony of Galata and into the Golden Horn's northern shore. 80 galleys were transported from the Bosphorus after paving a little over 1 mile route with wood. Thus the Byzantines stretched their troops over a longer portion of the walls. A little over a month later, Constantinople fell on May 29 following a 57-day siege. After this conquest, Mehmed moved the Ottoman capital from Adrianople to Constantinople. When Mehmed stepped into the ruins of the Bucolion, known to the Ottomans and Persians as the Palace of the Caesars, probably built over 1,000 years before by Theodosius II, he uttered the famous lines of Sadi: "The spider weaves the curtains in the palace of the Caesars. The owl calls the watches in the towers of Afrasiab." After the fall of Constantinople, Mehmed claimed the title of Caesar of Rome, Caesarum. However, this claim was not recognized by the Patriarch of Constantinople, or Christian Europe. Mehmed's claim rested with the concept that Constantinople was the seat of the Roman Empire. After the transfer of its capital to Constantinople in 330 AD and the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Mehmed also had a blood lineage to the Byzantine imperial family. His predecessor, Sultan Orhan I, had married a Byzantine princess, and Mehmed may have claimed descent from John Tsilips Komnenos. He was not the only ruler to claim such a title, as there was the Holy Roman Empire in Western Europe, whose emperor, Frederick III, traced his titular lineage from Charlemagne, who obtained the title of Roman Emperor when he was crowned by Pope Leo III in 800, although never recognized as such by the Byzantine Empire. After the fall of Constantinople, Mehmed would also go on to conquer the Despotate of Mora in the Peloponnese in 1460, and the Empire of Trebizond in northeastern Anatolia in 1461. The last two vestiges of Byzantine rule were thus absorbed by the Ottoman Empire. The conquest of Constantinople bestowed immense glory and prestige on the country. There is some historical evidence that, 10 years after the conquest of Constantinople, Mehmed II visited the site of Troy and boasted that he had avenged the Trojans by having conquered the Greeks. Byzantines. Mehmed II's first campaigns after Constantinople were in the direction of Serbia, who was an Ottoman vassal since the Battle of Kosovo. The Ottomans had a royal marriage with the Serbian despotate. One of Murad II's wives was Mara Branković, and used this to claim some Serbian lands. That Jurad Branković recently had made an alliance with the Hungarians and paid the tribute irregularly was probably the most important. When the Serbians refused these demands, the Ottoman army left. He turned towards Serbia in 1454. Smederevo was besieged and later captured, and there were Ottoman and Hungarian counterattacks during the years till 1456. In that year the Ottoman army advanced toward Eastern Europe as far as Belgrade, and attempted to conquer the city from John Hunyadi at the siege of Belgrade in 1456. Following Hunyadi's victory over the Mehmed II at the siege of Belgrade on the 14th of July 1456, a period of relative peace began in the region. The Sultan retreated to Adrianople, and Jurad Branković regained possession of Serbia. Before the end of the year, however, the 79-year-old Branković died. Serbian independence survived him for only another year, when the Ottoman Empire formally annexed his lands following dissension among his widow and 3 remaining sons. Lazar, the youngest, poisoned his mother and exiled his brothers, and the land returned to the Sultan's subjugation. The Despotate of the Mora was bordering the southern Ottoman Balkans. The Ottomans had already invaded these areas under Murad II, destroying the Byzantine defenses. the Hexamilion Wall at the Isthmus of Corinth in 1446. Before the final siege of Constantinople, Mehmed ordered Ottoman troops to attack the Mora. The despots, Demetrios Palaiologos and Thomas Palaiologos, brothers of the last emperor, failed to send any aid. Their own incompetence resulted in an Albanian Greek revolt against them, during which they invited in Ottoman troops to help them put down the revolt. At this time, a number of influential Moreot Greeks and Albanians made private peace with Mehmed. After more years of incompetent rule by the despots, their failure to pay their annual tribute to the Sultan, and finally their own revolt against Ottoman rule, Mehmed came into the Mora in May 1460. Demetrios ended up a prisoner of the Ottomans and his younger brother Thomas fled. By the end of the summer, the Ottomans had achieved the submission of virtually all cities possessed by the Greeks. A few holdouts remained for a time. The island of Monemvasia refused to surrender, and it was first ruled for a brief time by a Catalan Corsair. When the population drove him out, they obtained the consent of Thomas to submit to the Pope's protection before the end of 1460. The Mani Peninsula, on the Mora's south end, resisted under a loose coalition of the local clans, and then that area came under Venice's rule. The very last holdout was Samanico, in the Mora's northwest. Grācis Palaiologos was the military commander there, stationed at Samanico Castle, also known as Castle Orja. While the town eventually surrendered, Grācis and his garrison and some town residents held out in the castle until July 1461, when they escaped and reached Venetian territory. Previous emperors of Trebizond made alliances by having royal marriages with various Muslim rulers. So did Emperor John IV by forging alliances. He gave his daughter to the son of his brother-in-law, Uzun Husan, Khan of the Akoyanlu, in return for his promise to defend Trebizond. He also secured promises of help from the Turkish emirs of Sinope and Karamania, and from the king and princes of Georgia. The Ottomans were motivated to capture Trebizond or to get an annual tribute. In the time of Murad II, they first attempted to take the capital by sea in 1442, but high surf made the landings difficult and the attempt was repulsed. While Mehmed II was away laying siege to Belgrade in 1456, the Ottoman governor of Amasya attacked Trebizond, and although defeated, took many prisoners and extracted a heavy tribute. After John's death in 1459, his brother David came to power and misused these alliances. David intrigued with various European powers for help against the Ottomans, speaking of wild schemes that included the conquest of Jerusalem. Mehmed II eventually heard of these intrigues, and was further provoked to action by David's demand that Mehmed remit the tribute imposed on his brother. Mehmed's response came in the summer of 1461. He led a sizable army from Bursa from land and the Ottoman navy from the sea, first to Sinope, joining forces with Ismail's brother Ahmed, the Red. He captured Sinope and ended the official reign of the Jandarid dynasty, although he appointed Ahmed as the governor of Kastamonu and Sinope, only to revoke Ahmed's appointment the same year. Various other members of the Jandarid dynasty were offered important functions throughout the history of the Ottoman Empire. During the march to Trebizond, Uzun Husan sent his mother Sara Khatun as an ambassador. While they were climbing the steep heights of Zaganan on foot, she asked Sultan Mehmed why he was undergoing such hardship for the sake of Trebizond. Mehmed replied, "Mother, in my hand is the sword of Islam. Without this hardship I should not deserve the name of Ghazi, and today and tomorrow I should have to cover my face in shame before Allah." Having isolated Trebizond, Mehmed quickly swept down upon it before the inhabitants knew he was coming, and placed it under siege. The city held out for a month before the Emperor David surrendered on August 15, 1461. The Ottomans since the early 1400s tried to bring Wallachia under their control by putting their own candidate on the throne. The Ottomans regarded Wallachia as a buffer zone between them and the Kingdom of Hungary, and for a yearly tribute did not meddle in their internal affairs. Between the two primary Balkan powers, Hungary and the Ottoman, there was an enduring struggle to make Wallachia their own vassal. So in one of these struggles, in December 1447, Boyars in league with the Hungarian regent John Hunyadi rebelled against Vlad II Dracul and killed him in the marshes near Baltny. Mircea, Dracul's eldest son and heir, was blinded and buried alive at Dargovist. To prevent Wallachia from falling into the Hungarian fold, the Ottomans invaded Wallachia and put young Vlad III, the infamous Vlad the Impaler, who had spent part of his childhood alongside Mehmed on the throne. However, this rule was short-lived as Hunyadi himself now invaded Wallachia and restored his ally Vladislav II, of the dynasty clan, to the throne. Vlad fled to Moldavia, where he lived under the protection of his uncle, Bogdan II. In October 1451, Bogdan was assassinated and Vlad fled to Hungary. Impressed by Vlad's vast knowledge of the mindset and inner workings of the Ottoman Empire as well as his hatred of the new Sultan Mehmed II, Hunyadi reconciled with his former rival and made him his advisor. In 1456, 3 years after the Ottomans had conquered Constantinople, they threatened Hungary by besieging Belgrade. Hunyadi began a concerted counterattack in Serbia, while he himself moved into Serbia and relieved the siege. Before dying of the plague, Vlad led his own contingent into Wallachia, reconquered his native land and killed Vladislav II. Later that year, in 1459, Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II sent envoys to Vlad to urge him to pay a delayed tribute of 10,000 ducats and 500 recruits into the Ottoman forces. Vlad refused and had the Turkish envoys killed by nailing their turbans to their heads, on the pretext that they had refused to raise their hats to him, as they only removed their headgear before Allah. Meanwhile, the Sultan sent the Bey of Nicopolis, Hamza Pasha, to make peace and, if necessary, eliminate Vlad III. Vlad Tepes set an ambush. The Ottomans were surrounded and almost all of them caught and impaled, with Hamza Pasha impaled on the highest stake, as befit his rank. In the winter of 1462, Vlad crossed the Danube and devastated the entire Bulgarian land in the area between Serbia and the Black Sea. Disguising himself as a Turkish Sipahi and utilizing his fluent command of the language and customs, he infiltrated and destroyed Ottoman camps. Vlad ambushed, massacred or captured several Ottoman forces, then announced his impalement of over 23,000 captive Turks. In a letter to Corvinus dated 2 February, he wrote, "I have killed peasants, men and women, old and young, who lived at Ablusitsa and Novoslo, where the Danube flows into the sea, up Dreva, which is located near Chilia, from the lower Danube up to such places as Samovit and Gyan. We killed 23,884 Turks without counting those whom we burned in homes or the Turks whose heads were cut by our soldiers. Thus, Your Highness, you must know that I have broken the peace with him." Mehmed II. Mehmed II abandoned his siege of Corinth to launch a punitive attack against Vlad in Wallachia 27, but suffered many casualties in a surprise night attack led by Vlad, who was apparently bent on personally killing the Sultan. However, Vlad's scorched earth policies and demoralizing brutality were very unpopular, and Vlad fled to the mountains. After this, the Ottomans captured the Wallachian capital Targovist and Mehmed II withdrew. Wallachia was left to his ally Radislav Frumos, who became the new prince, and Tarahanoglu Omar Bey behind, who served with distinction and wiped out a force of 6,000 Wallachians and deposited 2,000 of their heads at the feet of Mehmed II. As a reward, he was reinstated in his old gubernatorial post in Thessaly. 29. Vlad eventually escaped to Hungary, where he was imprisoned on the false accusation of treason against his overlord. The despotate of Serbia Lazar Brankovic died in 1458, after which a civil war broke out among his heirs that resulted in the Ottoman conquest of Serbia in 1459. Stephen Tomasevic, son of the King of Bosnia, tried to bring Serbia under his control, but Ottoman expeditions forced him to give up his plan, and Stephen fled to Bosnia, seeking refuge at the court of his father. After some battles, Bosnia became tributary to the Ottomans. On the 10th of July 1461, Stephen Thomas died. Stephen Tomasevic succeeded him as King of Bosnia. In 1461, Stephen Tomasevic made an alliance with the Hungarians and asked Pope Pius II for help in the face of an impending Ottoman invasion. In 1463, after a dispute over the tribute paid annually by the Bosnian kingdom to the Ottomans, he sent for help from the Venetians. However, none ever reached Bosnia. In 1463, Sultan Mehmed II led an army into the country. The royal city of Bobovac soon fell, leaving Stephen Tomasevic to retreat to Jajce and later to Kljuk. Mehmed invaded Bosnia and conquered it very quickly, executing the last Bosnian king Stephen Tomasevic, and his uncle Radovoj. Bosnia officially fell in 1463 and became the westernmost province of the Ottoman Empire. According to the Byzantine historian Michael Critobulus, hostilities broke out because of the flight of an Albanian slave of the Ottoman commander of Athens to the Venetian fortress of Koroni, with 100,000 silver aspers from his master's treasure. The fugitive then converted to Christianity, and demands for his rendition by the Ottomans were therefore refused by the Venetian authorities. 31. Using this as a pretext, in November 1462, Tıranoglu Ömer Bey, the Ottoman commander in central Greece, attacked and nearly succeeded in taking the strategically important Venetian fortress of Lepanto, Nafpaktos. On the 3rd of April 1463, however, the governor of the Mora, Isa Beg, took the Venetian-held town of Argos by treason. The new alliance launched a two-pronged offensive against the Ottomans. A Venetian army, under the captain-general of the sea Alvise Laudon, landed in the Mora, while Matthias Corvinus invaded Bosnia. At the same time, Pius II began assembling an army at Ancona, hoping to lead it in person. Negotiations were also began with other rivals of the Ottomans, such as Karamanids, Uzun Husan and the Crimean Khanate. In early August, the Venetians retook Argos and refortified the Isthmus of Corinth, restoring the Hexamilion Wall and equipping it with many cannons. They then proceeded to besiege the fortress of the Acrocorinth, which controlled the northwestern Peloponnese. The Venetians engaged in repeated clashes with the defenders and with Ömer Bey's forces, until they suffered a major defeat on 20 October and were then forced to lift the siege and retreat to the Hexamilion and to Nafplion. In Bosnia, Matthias Corvinus seized over 60 fortified places and succeeded in taking its capital, Jajce, after a 3-month siege. On 16 December, Ottoman reaction was swift and decisive. Sultan Mehmed II dispatched his Grand Vizier, Mehmed Pasha Angelovic, with an army against the Venetians. To confront the Venetian fleet, which had taken station outside the entrance of the Dardanelles Straits, the Sultan further ordered the creation of the new shipyard of Kadiga Limani in the Golden Horn, named after the Kadiga type of galley, and of 2 forts to guard the straits, Kiladilbayr and Sultanii. The Mauryan campaign was swiftly victorious for the Ottomans. They raised the Hexamilion, and advanced into the Mora. Argos fell, and several forts and localities that had recognized Venetian authority reverted to their Ottoman allegiance. Sultan Mehmed II, who was following Mehmed Pasha with another army to reinforce him, had reached Zeytounian, Lamia, before being apprised of his vizier's success. Immediately, he turned his men north, towards Bosnia. However, the Sultan's attempt to retake Jajce in July and August 1464 failed, with the Ottomans retreating hastily. In the face of Corvinus' approaching army, a new Ottoman army under Mehmed Pasha then forced Corvinus to withdraw, but Jajce was not retaken for many years after. However, the death of Pope Pius II on 15 August in Ancona spelled the end of the crusade. In the meantime, for the upcoming campaign of 1464, the Republic had appointed Sigismundo Malatesta. He launched attacks against Ottoman forts, and engaged in a failed siege of Mistra in August to October. Small-scale warfare continued on both sides, with raids and counter-raids, but a shortage of manpower and money meant that the Venetians remained largely confined to their fortified bases, while Ömer Bey's army roamed the countryside. In the Aegean, the new Venetians tried to take Lesbos in the spring of 1464, and besieged the capital Mytilene for 6 weeks, until the arrival of an Ottoman fleet under Mehmed Pasha on 18 May forced them to withdraw. Another attempt to capture the island shortly after also failed. The Venetian navy spent the remainder of the year in ultimately fruitless demonstrations of force before the Dardanelles. In early 1465, Mehmed II sent peace feelers to the Venetian Senate in 1465. Distrusting the Sultan's motives. These were rejected. In April 1466, Vettor Capello, the Venetian war effort was reinvigorated. The fleet took the northern Aegean islands of Imbros, Thasos and Samothrace, and then sailed into the Saronic Gulf. On 12 July, Capello landed at Piraeus, and marched against Athens, the Ottomans' major regional base. He failed to take the Acropolis and was forced to retreat to Patras. Patras, being the capital of Peloponnese and the seat of the Ottoman Bey, was being besieged by the joint forces of Venetians and Greeks, before Capello could arrive there, and as the city seemed on the verge of falling, Omar Bey suddenly appeared with 12,000 cavalry, and drove the outnumbered besiegers off. 600 Venetians and 100 were taken prisoner out of a force of 2,000, while Barbarigo himself was killed. Capello, who arrived some days later, attacked the Ottomans, but was heavily defeated. Demoralized, he returned to Negroponte with the remains of his army. There Capello fell ill and died on the 13th of March 1467. In 1470 Mehmed personally led an Ottoman army to besiege Negroponte. The Venetian navy was defeated and Negroponte captured. In spring 1466, Sultan Mehmed marched with a large army against the Albanians. Under their leader, Skenderbeg, they had long resisted the Ottomans, and had repeatedly sought assistance from Italy. Mehmed II responded by marching again against Albania but was unsuccessful. The winter brought an outbreak of plague, which would recur annually and sap the strength of the local resistance. Skanderbeg himself died of malaria in the Venetian stronghold of Lissus, Les, ending the ability of Venice to use the Albanian lords for its own advantage. 44. After Skanderbeg died, some Venetian-controlled northern Albanian garrisons continued to hold territories coveted by the Ottomans, such as Zabiljaknajevica, Drisht, Lezhë, and Shkodra. The most significant. Mehmed II sent his armies to take Shkodra in 1474 but failed. Then he went personally to lead the siege of Shkodra of 1478-79. The Venetians and Shkodrans resisted the assaults and continued to hold the fortress until Venice ceded Shkodra to the Ottoman Empire in the Treaty of Constantinople as a condition of ending the war. The agreement was established as a result of the Ottomans having reached the outskirts of Venice. Based on the terms of the treaty, the Venetians were allowed to keep Ulcinj, Antivne, and Duz. However, they ceded Shkodra, which had been under Ottoman siege for many months, as well as other territories on the Dalmatian coastline, as well as relinquished control of the Greek islands of Negroponte, Euboea, and Lemnos. Moreover, the Venetians were forced to pay 100,000 ducat indemnity and agreed to a tribute of around 10,000 ducats per year in order to acquire trading privileges in the Black Sea. As a result of this treaty, Venice acquired a weakened position in the Levant. During the post-Seljuks era in the second half of the Middle Ages, numerous Turkmen principalities which are collectively known as Anatolian Beyliks emerged in Anatolia. Initially Karamanids, centered around the modern provinces of Karaman and Konya, was the most important power in Anatolia, but towards the end of the 1300s, Ottomans began to dominate on most of Anatolia, reducing the Karaman influence and prestige. Ibrahim II of Karaman was the ruler of Karaman. During his last years, his sons began struggling for the throne. His heir apparent was Ishak of Karaman, the governor of Silifke, but Mehmet, a younger son, declared himself as the Bey of Karaman and Konya. Ibrahim escaped to a small city in Western Territories where he died in 1464. Ishak of Karaman was at the time of his father's death a local governor in Silifke. When he tried to march to his capital Konya, he learned that his younger brother Mehmet had also put a claim on the throne. This resulted in an interregnum in the Beylik. Nevertheless, with the help of Uzun Husan, the Sultan of the Ahoyunlu, White Sheep, Turkmens, he was able to ascend to the throne. However, his reign was short. Because Mehmet appealed to Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II for help, he offered Mehmet some territory which Ishak refused to cede. With Ottoman help, Mehmet defeated Ishak in the Battle of Dagpasa. Ishak had to be content with Silifke up to an unknown date. He kept his promise and ceded a part of the Beylik to Ottomans. But he was uneasy about the loss. So during the Ottoman campaign in the west, he recaptured his former territory. However, Mehmet returned and captured both Karaman, La'ent, and Konya, two major cities of the Beylik. In 1466, Mehmet Beyli escaped to the east. A few years later, Ottoman Vizier, later Grand Vizier, Mehmed Pasha captured the coastal region of the Bilik. Mehmed as well as his brother Kazım escaped to Uzun Hasan's territory. This gave Uzun Hasan a chance to interfere. In 1472, the Akkoyunlu army invaded and raided most of Anatolia. This was the reason behind the Battle of Otlak Beyli in 1473. But then Mehmed led a successful campaign against Uzun Hasan in 1473, which resulted with the decisive victory of the Ottoman Empire in the Battle of Otlak Beyli. Before that, Mehmed with Akkoyunlu help had captured Karaman. However, Mehmed couldn't enjoy another term, because immediately after the capture of Karaman, the Akkoyunlu army was defeated by the Ottomans near Bessa and Mehmed had to escape once more. Although he tried to continue his struggle, he learned that his family members had been transferred to Istanbul by Mehmed Pasha, so he finally gave up. Demoralized, he escaped to Akkoyunlu territory where he was given a fief. In Bayburt he died in 1474. Uniting the Anatolian Biliks was first accomplished by Sultan Byzantine, more than 50 years earlier than Mehmed II, but after the destructive Battle of Ankara in 1402. The newly formed Anatolian unification was gone. Mehmed II recovered the Ottoman power on other Turkish states. These conquests allowed him to push further into Europe. Another important political entity which shaped the eastern policy of Mehmed II was the White Sheep Turkomans. Under the leadership of Uzun Hasan, this kingdom gained power in the east. But because of their strong relations with the Christian powers like Empire of Trebizond and the Republic of Venice and the alliance between Turkomans and Karamanid tribe, Mehmed saw them as a threat to his own power. In 1456, Peter III Eren agreed to pay the Ottomans an annual tribute of 2,000 gold ducats, in order to ensure his southern borders, thus becoming the first of the Moldavian rulers to accept the Turkish demands. His successor Stephen the Great rejected Ottoman suzerainty and a series of fierce wars ensued. Stephen tried to bring Wallachia under his sphere of influence and so supported his own choice for the Wallachian throne. This resulted in an enduring struggle between different Wallachian rulers backed by Hungarians, Ottomans and Stephen. An Ottoman army under Haydn Pasha was sent in 1475 to punish Stephen for his meddling in Wallachia. However, the Ottomans suffered a great defeat at the Battle of Vaslui. After the disaster of the Battle of Vaslui, the Sultan Mehmed II assembled a large army and entered Moldavia in June 1476. Meanwhile, groups of Tatars from the Crimean Khanate, the Ottomans' recent ally, were sent to attack Moldavia. Romanian sources may state that they were repelled. Other sources state that joint Ottoman and Crimean Tatar forces occupied Bessarabia and took Akerman, gaining control of southern mouth of Danube. Stefan tried to avoid open battle with the Ottomans by following a scorched earth policy. Finally, Stephen faced the Ottomans in battle. It began with the Moldavians luring the main Ottoman forces into a forest that was set on fire, causing some casualties to the attacking Ottoman army in the forest. According to another battle description, the defending Moldavian forces repelled several Ottoman attacks with steady fire from handguns. The attacking Turkish Janissaries were forced to crouch on their stomachs instead of charging headlong into the defenders' positions. Seeing the imminent defeat of his forces, Mehmed charged with his personal guard against the Moldavians, managing to rally the Janissaries and turning the tide of the battle. Turkish Janissaries penetrated inside the forest and engaged the defenders in man-to-man fighting. The Moldavian army was utterly defeated, casualties were very high on both sides, and the chronicles say that the entire battlefield was covered with the bones of the dead. A probable source for the toponym Vali Alba is Romanian and Akadir Turkish for the White Valley. Stefan Selmer retreated into the northwestern part of Moldavia or even into the Polish kingdom and began forming another army. The Ottomans were unable to conquer any of the major Moldavian strongholds, Suceava, Neamt, Hotin, and were constantly harassed by small-scale Moldavians' attacks. Soon they were also confronted with starvation, a situation made worse by an outbreak of the plague, and the Ottoman army returned to Ottoman lands. However, the threat of Stephen to Wallachia ceased. The Albanian resistance in Albania between 1443 and 1468, led by George Kastriot Iskender Bey, an Albanian noble and a former member of the Ottoman ruling elite, prevented the Ottoman expansion into the Italian peninsula. Citation needed. Skanderbeg had united the Albanian principalities in a fight against the empire in the League of Les in 1444. Mehmed II couldn't subjugate Albania and Skanderbeg while the latter was alive, even though twice, 1466 and 1467, he led the Ottoman armies himself against Kru. After death of Skanderbeg in 1468, Albanians couldn't find a leader to replace him, and Mehmed II eventually conquered Kru and Albania in 1478. In spring 1466, Sultan Mehmed marched with a large army against the Albanians. Under their leader, Skanderbeg, they had long resisted the Ottomans, and had repeatedly sought assistance from Italy. For the Albanians, the outbreak of the Ottoman-Venetian War offered a golden opportunity to reassert their independence. For the Venetians, they provided a useful cover to the Venetian coastal holdings of Durazzo and Scutari. The major result of this campaign was the construction of the fortress of Elbasan, allegedly within just 25 days. This strategically sited fortress, at the lowlands near the end of the old Via Ignatia, cut Albania effectively in half, isolating Skanderbeg's base in the northern highlands from the Venetian holdings in the south. However, following the Sultan's withdrawal, Skanderbeg himself spent the winter in Italy, seeking aid. On his return in early 1467, his forces sallied from the highlands, defeated Balaban Pasha and lifted the siege of the fortress of Kru, attacked Elbasan but failed to capture it. Mehmed II responded by marching again against Albania. He energetically pursued the attacks against the Albanian strongholds, while sending detachments to raid the Venetian possessions to keep them isolated. The Ottomans failing again to take Kru, and they failed to subjugate the country. However, the winter brought an outbreak of plague, which would recur annually and sap the strength of the local resistance. Skanderbeg himself died of malaria in the Venetian stronghold of Lissus, Les, ending the ability of Venice to use the Albanian lords for its own advantage. The Albanians were left to their own devices, and were gradually subdued over the next decade. After Skanderbeg died, the final act of his Albanian campaigns was the troublesome siege of Shkodra in 1478-9. The final siege that Mehmed II led personally and of which early Ottoman chronicler Askparsazad, 1400-81, wrote, "All the conquests of Sultan Mehmed were fulfilled with the seizure of Shkodra." Some Venetian-controlled northern Albanian garrisons continued to hold territories coveted by the Ottomans, such as Zabiljaknajevica, Drisht, Lezhë, and Shkodra, the most significant. Mehmed II sent his armies to take Shkodra in 1474 but failed. Then he went personally to lead the siege of Shkodra of 1478-79. The Venetians and Shkodrans resisted the assaults and continued to hold the fortress until Venice ceded Shkodra to the Ottoman Empire in the Treaty of Constantinople as a condition of ending the war. A number of Turkic peoples, now collectively known as the Crimean Tatars, have been inhabiting the peninsula since the early Middle Ages. After the destruction of the Golden Horde by Timur in 1441, the Crimean Tatars founded an independent Crimean Khanate under Hakyagirei, a descendant of Genghis Khan. The Crimean Tatars controlled the steppes that stretched from the Kuban and to the Dniester River. However, they were unable to take control over the commercial Genoese towns called Gez area, Genoese colonies, who were under Genoese control since 1357. After the conquest of Constantinople, the Genoese communications were disrupted, and when the Crimean Tatars asked for help from the Ottomans, an Ottoman invasion of the Genoese towns led by Gedik Ahmed Pasha in 1475 brought Kaffa and the other trading towns under their control. After the capture of Genoese towns, the Ottoman Sultan held Meḥmed-i captive, later releasing him in return for accepting Ottoman suzerainty over the Crimean Khans and allowing them rule as tributary princes of the Ottoman Empire. However, The Crimean Khans still had a large amount of autonomy from the Ottoman Empire, while the Ottomans directly controlled the southern coast. An Ottoman army under Gedic Ahmed Pasha invaded Italy in 1480. The Ottoman army captured Otranto in 1480, but after the death of Mehmed most of the troops returned and Otranto was retaken by papal forces in 1481. Because of lack of food, Gedic Ahmed Pasha returned with most of his troops to Albania, leaving a garrison of 800 infantry and 500 cavalry behind to defend Otranto. It was assumed he would return after the winter. Since it was only 28 years after the fall of Constantinople, there was some fear that Rome would suffer the same fate. Plans were made for the Pope and citizens of Rome to evacuate the city. Pope Sixtus IV repeated his 1471 call for a crusade. Several Italian city-states, Hungary and France, responded positively to this. The Republic of Venice did not, as it had signed an expensive peace treaty with the Ottomans in 1479. In 1481 an army was raised by King Ferdinand I of Naples to be led by his son Alfonso II of Naples. A contingent of troops was provided by King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. The city was besieged starting May 1, 1481. On May 3 the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Mehmed II, died, with ensuing quarrels about his succession. This possibly prevented the sending of Ottoman reinforcements to Otranto. So in the end the Turkish occupation of Otranto ended by negotiation with the Christian forces, permitting the Turks to withdraw to Albania. Finally, Christian Constantinople, the old thorn in the side of generations of Muslim caliphs, was under Muslim Ottoman control. When Mehmed II finally entered Constantinople through what is now known as the Topkapi Gate, he immediately rode his horse to the Hagia Sophia, which he ordered to be protected. He ordered that an imam meet him there in order to chant the Muslim creed. I testify that there is no God but God. I testify that Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah. This act symbolically transformed the Orthodox cathedral into a Muslim mosque, solidifying Islamic rule in Constantinople. Mehmed's main concern with Constantinople had to do with rebuilding the city's defenses and repopulation. Building projects were commenced immediately after the conquest, which included the repair of the walls, construction of the citadel, and building a new palace. To encourage the return of the Greeks and the Genoese who had fled from Galata, the trading quarter of the city, he returned their houses and provided them with guarantees of safety. Mehmed issued orders across his empire that Muslims, Christians, and Jews should resettle in the city. He demanded that 5,000 households needed to be transferred to Constantinople by September. From all over the Islamic Empire, prisoners of war and deported people were sent to the city. These people were called Surgan in Turkish. He restored the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate, January 6, 1454, and established a Jewish Grand Rabbi and an Armenian Patriarch in the city. In addition, he founded, and encouraged his viziers to found a number of Muslim institutions and commercial installations in the main districts of Constantinople, such as the Rum Mehmed Pasha Mosque built by the Grand Vizier Rum Mehmed Pasha. From these nuclei, the metropolis developed rapidly. According to a survey carried out in 1478, there were then in Constantinople and neighboring Galata 16,324 households and 3,927 shops, an estimated population of 80,000, about 60% Muslim, 20% Christian and 10 Jewish. 50 years later, Constantinople had become the largest city in Europe. 2 centuries later, Ottoman traveler of Liya Celebi gave a list of groups introduced into the city with their respective origins. Even today, many quarters of Istanbul, such as Aksaray, Çarşamba, bear the names of the places of origin of their inhabitants. However, many people escaped again from the city, and there were several outbreaks of plague, so that in 1459 Mehmet allowed the deported Greeks to come back to the city. This measure apparently had no great success, Since French voyager Pierre Gilles writes in the middle of the 1500s that the Greek population of Constantinople was unable to name any of the ancient Byzantine churches which had been transformed in mosques or been abandoned. This shows that the population substitution had been total. Mehmed's ambitious rebuilding program changed the city by the end of his reign in a thriving imperial capital. According to the contemporary Ottoman historian Nesri, Sultan Mehmed created all of Istanbul. Mehmed II amalgamated the old Byzantine administration into the Ottoman state. Citation needed. He first introduced the word politics into Arabic siyasa from a book he published and claimed to be the collection of politics doctrines of the Byzantine Caesars before him. He gathered Italian artists, humanists and Greek scholars at his court, allowed the Byzantine Church to continue functioning, ordered the Patriarch Gennadius to translate Christian doctrine into Turkish, and called Gentile Bellini from Venice to paint his portrait. He collected in his palace a library which included works in Greek and Latin. Mehmed invited Muslim scientists such as Al-Ikhji and artists to his court in Constantinople, started a university, built mosques, for example, the Fatih Mosque, waterways, and Istanbul's Topkapı Palace and the tiled kiosk. Around the Grand Mosque that he constructed, he erected 8 madrasas, which, for nearly a century, kept their rank as the highest teaching institutions of the Islamic sciences in the empire. Mehmed II allowed his subjects a considerable degree of religious freedom, provided they were obedient to his rule. After his conquest of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1463, he issued a firman to the Bosnian Franciscans, granting them freedom to move freely within the empire, offer worship in their churches and monasteries, and to practice their religion free from official and unofficial persecution, insult or disturbance. His standing army was recruited from the Devshirme, a group that took firstborn Christian subjects at a young age and destined them for the Sultan's court. The less able, but physically strong, were instead put into the army or the Sultan's personal guard, the Janissaries. Within Constantinople, Mehmed established a militant and autonomous religious community, and appointed the former Patriarch Gennadius Scholarius as religious leader for the Orthodox Christians of the city. His authority extended to all Ottoman Orthodox Christians, and this excluded the Genoese and Venetian settlements in the suburbs, and excluded Muslim and Jewish settlers entirely. This method allowed for an indirect rule of the Christian Byzantines and allowed the occupants to feel relatively autonomous even as Mehmed II began the Turkish remodeling of the city, turning it into the Turkish capital, which it remained until the 1920s. Mehmed II had several wives: Gulbahar Hatun, who died in 1492, Gulsa Hatun, m.1451, daughter of Karamanli Ibrahim Bey, Mukrama, Sitai Mukraim, Hatun, m.1446, biological mother of Bayezid II, daughter of Suleiman Bey, the 6th ruler of Delkadir state, Hatice Hatun, m.1451, who got divorced in 1453, daughter of Ziganos Paza, Sisek Hatun, m.1458, daughter of Turkmen Bey. He had 4 sons, Bayezid II, Sultansam, Korkad and Mustafa, and 1 daughter, Jevakan. Helena Palaiologina, Maria Gattilusio, Anna Komnenos and Alexias, a Byzantine princess, were taken to Sultan Mehmed's harem and were never his wives. On his accession as conqueror of Constantinople, aged 21, Mehmed was reputed fluent in several languages, including Turkish, Arabic, Hebrew, Persian, Greek and Latin. At times, he assembled the ulama, or learned Muslim teachers, and caused them to discuss theological problems in his presence. In his reign, mathematics, astronomy, and Muslim theology reached their highest level among the Ottomans. Mehmed himself was a poet writing under the name Avni, the helper, the helpful one, and he left a divan, a collection of poems in the traditional style of classical Ottoman literature. Franz Bugger, in his book Mehmed the Conqueror and His Time, asserted that he was attracted to both women and men, by basing this upon various Byzantine historians such as Dukas, Chalkakandlas. However, these assertions met fierce criticism from modern Turkish historians, including Halil Inalcik, pointing out that contemporary Ottoman sources do not mention this. In 1481 Mehmed marched with the Ottoman army to a new campaign, but when reaching Maltepe, Istanbul, the place was later called Hunkasayr, Field of the Sultan. He became sick and after some days he died on May 3, 1481, at the age of 49, and was buried in his turban in the cemetery within the Fatih Mosque complex. The cause of his death is believed to be poisoning, but on whose behalf it was is disputed. Mehmed's primary doctor, Yaqub Pasha, a Jewish convert to Islam, was suspected of administering poison to Mehmed over a period of time. Yaqub Pasha was killed a short time later during the revolt of the Janissaries. Another source states that the likeliest possibility is that Mehmed was also poisoned by his Persian doctor. Despite numerous Venetian assassination attempts over the years, the finger of suspicion points most strongly at his son, Bayezid. The news of Mehmed's death caused great rejoicing in Europe. Church bells were rung and celebrations held. The news was proclaimed in Venice as La Grande Aquila e Morta, the Great Eagle is dead. After the fall of Constantinople, he founded many mosques and religious schools in the city, such as the Kulai of the Fatih Mosque. Mehmed II is recognized as the first sultan to codify criminal and constitutional law, long before Suleiman the Magnificent. He thus established the classical image of the autocratic Ottoman Sultan. His 31-year rule and several wars expanded the Ottoman Empire to include Constantinople, and the Turkish kingdoms and territories of Asia Minor, Bosnia, Kingdom of Serbia, and Albania. His many internal administrative and legal reforms put his country on the path to prosperity and paved the way for subsequent sultans to focus on expansion into new territories. Mehmed left behind an imposing reputation in both the Islamic and Christian worlds. According to Franz Bauger, Mehmed was regarded as a bloodthirsty tyrant by the Christian world and by a part of his subjects. Mehmed is the eponymous subject of Rossini's 1820 opera Mahomet II. Istanbul's Fatih Sultan Mehmet Bridge, completed 1988, which crosses the Bosporus Straits, is named after him, and his name and picture appeared on the Turkish 1,000 lira note from 1986 to 1992.